It's, been a little while since last time, huh? Then let's not waste any more. You are watching this video today because a developer at Intelligent Systems asked what Famicom Wars would be like if it had a fantasy story. This developer was Shouzou Kaga, and it's because of his desire to push the strategy genre beyond what Famicom Wars tried, the series we know as Fire Emblem was birthed. Kaga is the father of Fire Emblem, but he's no longer with the series, or even at Intelligent Systems for that matter. This next game would be his last time at the Fire Emblem series. This was the end of an era, and the last game that would truly push what Fire Emblem could be. The game in question today is Fire Emblem Thracia 776, released for the Super Famicom September 1st of 1999? Yeah, it shouldn't be surprising that this is by far the worst selling game in the Fire Emblem series. Who is really interested in getting a new game for their dusty Super Famicoms when you could be playing Super Smash Bros. With a group of friends? But looking at the context of development, things do make more sense as to why Thracia is the game that it is. It started off being a small side project that was focused on being gameplay oriented for the most hardcore strategy fans. It was only ever really made into a full game because the developers just had more and more ideas of what they wanted to do with it. And it's probably because of the fact that it was a smaller project that it still did pretty well despite the low sales numbers. Either way, whether this game was or wasn't a commercial success is not the part we really care about. We're just here to see how the Fire Emblem series evolved over time. Thracia 776 is actually the only game in the series that I didn't play through completely before this retrospective began. So this video will be more of a first impressions than any other video in the series. If I don't sound like a complete expert or I say something that other people in the community find a little questionable, that's just because I'm not as comparatively familiar with this game as others in the series. Though I've tried my best and I've done my research, so I think I've made a good list of things to take away from it. Anyway, let's get on with it. This is the last Fire Emblem game for the Super Famicom. Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Thracia 776 takes place on the continent of Yggdrasil, the same continent as Genealogy of the Holy War. This specific tale focuses in on the Thracian Peninsula in the year 776, hence the title. 13 years before the events of the game is when things take a dire turn for the Manster District, where the royals of House Leonster are tragically killed and the city is set to the torch. A brave knight by the name of Finn escapes the city with the only known surviving member of the royal family. Don't cry too much, baby. It's not a Fire Emblem game unless your dad dies. But then again, who is this baby? I don't care about kids. People who played the previous game long enough may remember the character of Leaf. This game is the story of Leaf and his upbringing. This actually leaves Thracia 776 in a unique position for its placement in the series timeline. Thracia is neither a sequel nor prequel. It's a side story, or sidequel if you will, taking place more than a decade after Sigurd's journey, and will last into the events of Selev's campaign. Leaf decides it's finally time for people to stop protecting him, and be the one to fight for the safety of his family. Over his trials, tribulations, and fated meetings, Leaf takes up the role of leading the Thracian Liberation Army to free his country from Imperial rule. What can I say about the story overall? Well, for one thing, it's a notable step back from the conflicts of Genealogy. This is mostly due to the scope of the game being much smaller, only set in one region of Yggdrasil, as opposed to the entire thing. This wouldn't be a problem on its own if the game didn't feel like resorting to a similar setup of a royal heir forced out of his country so he can build up an army and reclaim it. Yeah, it's a little similar to something, isn't it? It wasn't so close to Shadow Dragon that it felt like a retelling, but it doesn't do anything interesting to have left any impact on me. Some of the characters like Finn, Evel, August, and Sias I think are great. When Thracia takes the effort to really establish a character, they stand out ridiculously well. But most everyone else is just very weak in my eyes, to the point where they almost don't even exist. There is also the matter of the current translation of the game. Fans of the series took it upon themselves to translate the early Fire Emblem games since they were only in Japanese originally. Thracia is no different, but it's also the least finished of the existing translations. The most up-to-date translation patch of the game features a lot of broken text. This isn't a fault of the people who were involved in patching this game. Their work was admirable even for a fan effort, but the unfinished state of the translation took a lot away from my experience of enjoying the story and characters. However, when more up-to-date translations get released, or if a remake is eventually made, This won't become much of an issue anymore, but as of right now, because of the rather poor state the story is in, there's not really a whole lot I want to comment on. It's a pretty cool story overall, but it's not the most boundary-breaking or unique game in the series. So yeah, this story summary was a little bit shorter than most of my others in the series, and if you're really looking for something more in-depth, I'm sorry. But the truth is, that's not really what I was focusing on in this game, and neither were the developers. Thracia 776 was a strategy game first and foremost, one for the most hardcore and dedicated fans of the series, and that is what we're really going to focus on today. In the last episode of the Fire Emblem Retrospective, I said that Genealogy of the Holy War was my least favorite game in the series, with a pretty negative tone, and that makes me feel bad. I still really like the game anyway, but it introduced the series to a ton of new important mechanics and ideas. But when it comes down to fundamentals, it put telling a story that would set a new bar for games above being a compelling strategy game. And that's what makes Thracia so interesting. In the same way that Fire Emblem 3 was the true successor to Fire Emblem 1, Fire Emblem 5 is the true successor to Fire Emblem 3. It looks and plays like Genealogy, but Thracia pulls it all together into a tighter focus to complement the game's vision. The typical map flow from Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem return, but with one interesting twist. Thracia was the first game of the series to offer up multiple mission objectives. The primary objective was to seize a point, as always, but sometimes you would get a map that required you to escape. Sometimes you would have to defend a point on the map. Sometimes you even had multiple requirements in a chapter. It didn't happen a lot, but it was enough to change up the gameplay on the occasions it did happen. A lot of smaller additions were also made to diversify the game from the others in the series. There was one mechanic in Genealogy in the form of leadership stars that I forgot to mention last time. I didn't think they were really all that worth bringing up last time, but they played much more of an impact on this game in particular. In Genealogy, when an ally stood next to or close to Sigurd or Seliph, they gained a boost in various statistics which could help make the difference in battle. I like the concept more in Thracia, however. Not only do multiple characters have leadership stars people can take advantage of, the range of the effect is global. Now Leif could be on the opposite side of the map from Finn, and Finn would still get the bonus. There's one little hook, however. Enemies also have leadership stars, and there are certain ones with more than your army will ever have combined. This can make certain chapters absolute hell to play legitimately, but I think it's a pretty fun addition, since you have to bring your own characters with leadership stars to even the odds a bit. Alongside leadership, movement stars were also added. There might be a chance that after a unit takes their action, they will get a second wind and move again, signified by a music note popping above their head. It's not something you can ever rely on happening, but whenever it procs, it's an absolute boost of morale for the player when it does, and an order for agonizing screams if the enemy gets it off. Let's get into some bigger additions though. The most significant thing Thracia brought to the series is rescue. If a unit had a higher constitution stat to the unit they were standing next to, in other words, if someone was buffer than the other, they could pick up that person next to them, preventing the rescued unit from fighting, but that also meant not taking damage from enemy attacks. There was one caveat to rescuing, however, that being that the rescuer's skill, speed, and movement stats were all lowered upon carrying. This meant by rescuing one unit, they were putting themselves in danger. Ladies and gentlemen, this changes everything! I liked playing Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem, but one thing that really freaked me out about those games is that if I ever made a wrong move and put a unit in a bad spot, they could be subject to death. Even if I recognize the mistake later, there's nothing I could really do to salvage it. Rescuing gives an out to players who can recognize the original plan they had may not have worked, but you're not only using up another turn of your unit that could have been spent elsewhere, you're putting them in potential danger as well. The idea is to sacrifice a little for saving a lot, and that's why rescuing is one of my favorite mechanics in this series. In addition to the rescue command, there was also the inverse that was added, being the capture command. You would deal a weaker blow to your enemies than normal, but if successfully defeated, that unit could take the enemy with them. Okay, but why? Well, Leif is not rich, and in Thracia, weapons are expensive, costing near triple the price they would be in any other game in the series. You start this game with not a single coin to your name, but if you capture an enemy, you can take their weapons and items, and let them off free. If you were skilled and sometimes lucky enough to effectively capture enemies, you could make it through the entire game without needing to visit a shop once. It also gave you a new reason to look at the inventories of your enemies. If they had cool stuff, you might want to plan a strategy to take it for yourself. Even still, capturing is not easy to do, and despite how contextually cool it is, it can lead to some very disorganized inventories, especially in the early game. Unlike in Genealogy, trading between units is something that was brought back, but I'll give Genealogy this one thing. At least you always had a weapon to use. At least you always had an opportunity to check your inventories and repair or buy new weapons before you deployed. Every game in the series gave you some opportunity to take preparations before starting the next battle. The preparations menu does appear in this game, but not until Chapter 8, which, including side quests, is 10 chapters into the game, about a third of the way through. Until that point, there are some units that simply may not have a weapon to use, and it's just not great. And given the broken translation of the game, good luck when you get to that point. Download the menu patch or consult the wiki, your choice. You'll have to put a little bit effort into making this game easier for yourself, but it's worth the trouble. But there are sometimes aspects about capturing units that's an absolute pain. There's this one dude in Chapter 16A that comes with a soul skill book, along with some other cool goodies, so you want to capture him to take his stuff. Here's the thing though, he's on a horse, making him impossible to capture, but even if you could get there to capture him, he also has a boltling which is able to one-shot some of your weaker units. How the heck was it ever intended that you... Wait. Oh. If there's one tool that Fire Emblem players forget to utilize because they're either afraid of how unreliable it is or saving it for later, it's stash condition staves. And this is a pitfall I find myself in as well. But if you want to make the most out of Thracia, you can really get creative with these staves. Setting a person to sleep to make an effortless capture is just one simple idea. Using a hammerine staff to repair weapons like Excalibur or Poogie, setting one of the stronger enemies in a faraway group berserk so they can clear the numbers by the time you get there, warp scumming chapters. There's a lot of creative things that you can do into the chapters if you aren't afraid to use them. This is also the series' introduction of the weapons rank progression. There are a variety of weapon tiers in the Fire Emblem series. However, the more powerful weapons could only be used by the most adept units. However, weapon familiarity is leveled up individually. The more a unit uses that type of weapon, the more experience they will gain in that weapon, and upon reaching a certain threshold, will level up their proficiency, allowing them to use stronger weapon variants. Every game after Thracia would adopt this weapon system, and it's something I am eternally grateful for. Contextually, it makes more sense, and rewards long-term planning. But let's get on with my favorite part about this game, the Crusader Scrolls. Items that were not consumable, but holding them granted a great benefit. Thracia is one of the games in the Fire Emblem series where nearly every one of your playable units suck. But they all have the potential to grow into some of the best fighters in any Fire Emblem game you'll play. In all the Fire Emblem games, when a unit levels up, their stats will grow. Every unit in the game has a unique hidden percentage behind each of their stats, and upon leveling up, each stat has the probability to increase based on that percentage. The Crusader Scrolls boost the likelihood of stats increasing upon leveling up. It requires a lot of management and forward thinking to use them, but allows the player to have some customization in how they want to build their armies. You can build some of the most disgusting units in this series, and be rewarded for doing so, especially in a game like Thracia where nearly every unit stat caps out at 20, and every stat is useful to every unit. It makes progress easy to chart, and satisfying to pull off effectively. I do want to address some potential comments of, Crusader Scrolls? Isn't that basically just star shards from Mystery of the Emblem? Firstly, you only have a very small window of accessibility for the star shards in Mystery of the Emblem, so it goes underutilized. And second of all, I didn't know that's what the star shards did in Fire Emblem 3. And I didn't know until I wrote this video. I'm absolutely of the opinion that Crusader Scroll equivalents should make a return for the series. It totally changed the way I played this game in a way that I had a lot more fun with. I spent more time in menus trading items in this game than any other in the series, and it paid off for doing so. This was also just my first playthrough this game. Imagine if I go back to this game later when I already know how this stuff works and when to utilize it. Oh boy, I'm excited for the thought. Which I think makes a perfect opportunity to jump into the not so great things about this game. Before I played this game, I heard that Thracia 776 was the most difficult game in the Fire Emblem series, period. So tell us the news, ChrisTheFIelds. Is this game really so hard? Well, sorta? This game certainly starts out challenging, but I think as long as you play carefully, there isn't too much you really need to worry about. It's not until much later in this game, past chapter 18 or so, when the game really starts to get difficult. But it's for a very particular reason. Thracia 776 is horribly balanced. I thought genealogy was bad. I wouldn't be surprised if this game had a drastically smaller playtesting period than any other game in this series. Let's start out with the obvious one, the map design. It's actually really good overall. Solid map layouts and challenging group of enemies that are placed in ways that keep the battles engaging over the duration. But I don't think these are some of the best maps in the series, as other people tend to think. Thracia is not very friendly to newcomers. Many will just tell you to look up a guide if it's your first time playing, which to me defeats the purpose of a strategy game when you know what to expect. But I think in the case of Thracia, you definitely should. The first thing that should be noted is that later maps in the series have a real problem thinking difficulty means more enemies and a lot of reinforcement. Which, I suppose is technically true, but it can be a bit too much at times. This map gives me Genealogy of the Holy War vibes. Granted, it takes place on one of the maps of Genealogy of the Holy War, but there are way too many Cavaliers, and it's giving me PTSD. The second problem comes with escape maps. The map will end when Leaf exits the map, but any other soldiers that were left behind do not return for the following chapter. Meaning if you want everyone to come with you, you need to have Leaf be the final one to leave every escape chapter. My first playthrough of this game, I did not know this would happen, and I accidentally screwed myself for the next chapter when Leaf was the only one left in my party, which made the following chapter actually impossible. But there's one other huge annoyance that I have with the map design, and I think I know exactly what Kaga was thinking when making this game. Sir, we finished the map designs for some of the late game chapters. Do you mind checking them over for us? Put more ballista in there. Okay, that's a good idea. Adding a ballista here will change the way the player has to approach this group of enemies. No. Put in more ballista. Okay, sure. Let's just say 5 ballista across the map as the player progresses. No. Put in more. Even as reinforcements. What? Do you even... Okay, fine, we'll do it. Now make sure each of those bishops can inflict an obnoxious status condition. Barring that, Kaga still had the goal of making the most difficult and engaging strategy game he could. The most obvious indication was the fatigue system. Taking actions, such as battling foes, would slightly increase a unit's fatigue, and when a unit's fatigue exceeds their max HP, they would be unusable for the next chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say, this is annoying, but I kinda like it. One of the always common cheese strats in Fire Emblem was to find a way to build a beefcake unit that could just defeat foes easily with and send them into the front lines. If you did this in Thracia, you're putting your long-term strategy at risk. Not to mention, just having units attack the enemies just for the sake of attacking for experience points was something that needed to be considered much more heavily. However, the stamina system is something that was only unique to Thracia. No other game in the series had anything that was remotely similar. Perhaps that's for the best though, because the stamina system is kinda bad. It only hinders you when put into effect, and I do think the fatigue system is cool, and I understand how it encourages multiple teams, but I'm not really clamoring to have it return for the series. But Kaga just couldn't stop there, the statistic dastard! He decided to go on and add the one thing that made me bitter about life. Thracia 776 is also the first game in the series to include formal side quests, or some people call them Gaiden chapters, indicated by a small X after the chapter number. Side quests were generally more difficult maps that would also be the introduction to Fog of War missions. I almost despise this game, out of my obligation to be disgusted by Fog of War missions, let alone the game that introduced them. Fog of War in Fire Emblem is exactly what you expect it to be. Enemy units are hidden if you're not close to them. However, unlike in later games in the series where you could still see the map and where you needed to go, every tile that isn't seen is completely black. Have fun trying to navigate around to where your objective is! And since you don't even know the layouts of the stages, you can't even predict where you think enemies might be. Despite my grievances with it, that isn't even the most obnoxious thing about this game. Fire Emblem makes this one small tweak to the number system. In every game in the series, hit rates capped out at 100% and bottomed out at 0%. However, in this game, there will always be a chance, no matter how small, that either has the potential to miss or strike. This isn't really so bad until you realize one small factor in this game. Healing stabs can miss in this game. I repeat, healing stabs can miss in this game. But beyond all those, I think I found it. I think I found the reason why many people think this is the most difficult game in the franchise. The RNG. Here's the thing. I've seen things that no Fire Emblem fan, no XCOM fan, should ever have to see. A 99% chance to strike, missing. This happened in the first chapter of the game, no less. I wasn't too bothered by it at first. I've been playing Fire Emblem long enough that I figured this thing was bound to happen eventually. But then it happened again! 3 times! I played some older games in the series. I played some Gaidens, and some genealogies, and some Mystery of the How Am I Getting So Many Critical Hits? But I've never seen as many shenanigans as in this game, and I'm not alone in this either.
So does this mean that Thracia 776 is out to get the player's livelihood, no matter the cost? Probably not.
Firstly, it should be mentioned that everyone who played this game could very well just so happen to have been unlucky enough to have horrible RNG failure. The second reason is that although every game in the series up to this point uses the same RNG system to calculate hit rates, there could be some slight variations in the code when calculating that I don't know about, but are very noticeable in this game specifically. The only other possible explanation I can think of is that in Thracia's code is an anti-piracy measure. Its response when piracy is detected, imbalance the RNG, make your successful hits miss sometimes. Though that's something I can't prove just by experimenting because of how unreliable my tools would be. And even if I could get into the code of the game, I would have no idea where to look. I haven't seen anyone else make this claim or proposal, so I could just be an idiot, which I am, but it will never just be more than a guess, and I'm fine with that. But all in all, that's Thracia 776. It doesn't start out leaving a very strong impression, and as a newcomer fresh to the game, there are a lot of ways I noticed how terribly designed it can be. But if you're willing to stick with it and learn, the ways this game can be amazing is so very clear. If I had to make a list of my favorite Fire Emblem games, Thracia 776 would probably fall right in the middle of the pack. Perhaps I would feel differently if I were to play this game again, and my feeling of this game may drastically rise if it were to ever be remade, but as of right now, it's just fine. And for what that's worth, that's really awesome in my book.
After Thracia 776 was finished, Shouzou Kaga would finally leave behind the series he built for all these years. But Fire Emblem didn't stop there. The core team at Intelligent Systems was working hard to find the next step for the series. It took a little while, a couple failed attempts and multiple years of development wasted, but it would eventually come to the game that would lay the foundation for every single game in the series following that one.